welcome back to our Leadership and Teams class. Again, this is Neil Fogarty, and we're going to be taking a look at Lecture 2 now, which is going to be on motivation. If you think about it, the main star there certainly had a big problem with regard to motivation. And if you have employees who are like him, the odds are that you're going to find that productivity in your plant isn't very high. You're probably going to find that absenteeism is high. You're probably going to find that people, when they're at work, aren't really caring about what they do. They won't give the extra effort to go the extra mile. And all this is going to come back and to reflect on you. And you kind of get that impression with regard to where he's working and how he felt about that. So as a challenge for you with regard to this, if you did have an employee like this, what could you do to motivate him or her so that all of a sudden you might find that his or her productivity has gone up, all of a sudden the work product has gotten better, and this is going to reflect better on you when you go for your various performance appraisals before your various bosses up the ladder as well. So what could you do? What could you do to motivate this young man to do better and really want to achieve? Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to get into the lecture topic and take a look at the key aspects of motivation. We're going to divide the lecture on motivation into two major sections. The first section is going to be talking about some key buzzwords and buzz phrases that are associated with motivation. There are a lot of buzzwords and buzz phrases we're going to hit through the lecture, but these are some foundation ones for you. And then the second major topic that we're going to take a look at in motivation, we're going to look at some of the theories and principles of motivation. Get some ideas of what are some people's thoughts about doing this and that. This school says to do that. That school says to do this. Get an idea of what they say. And if any of those things fit what you're doing, how can you use them? So let's get started here with regard to some key buzzwords and phrases that we have. There basically are three that I want you to take a look at. We're going to be looking at three words that all sound similar and are probably easily confused. I wouldn't if I were you, particularly with regard to quiz 1, but also for your career as well. The three words are motive and motivation and morale. Motive, motivation, and morale. Let's take a look at how the textbook defines those. So let's look at the first one. The first one again is the word motive. The textbook defines this as something that causes one to act. Like in a detective show, you oftentimes see something like, why did somebody get murdered? What was the motive here for the crime that we have? Oftentimes you'll find it's greed or ego, might be love, romance, or something like that. But that's what we're talking about there. The first of these key words, motive. Let's now take a look at the second key word. The second key word is the word motivation, and your textbook has two definitions for it. Let's take a look at each of those definitions. The first definition of motivation, it's an internal process within a person that energizes, directs, and sustains behavior. It's an internal process within a person that energizes, directs, and sustains behavior. And the second of these two definitions, it's an internal force that causes one to act in some way. An internal force that causes one to act in some way. This differs from person to person, and it differs even within one person over a period of time. Look at those two definitions. There's something special about them. If I had asked you to define the word motivation, you might have come up with something similar to either of these, maybe both, but there's something you might have missed, something that the authors think is important, something that's not very usual, something that's kind of odd. And that is, notice how both of these definitions use the word internal. We would oftentimes say, hey, the motivation for me running out the door was somebody over here started a fire. So the fire was my motivation to go running out the door. But this isn't saying that, because a fire is external to me, right? It's not internal, but the definition given by the book says it's internal. So what does that mean? Well, the fire is an external cause, but what really motivates me to run out the door? It's something inside me that sees this, oh my gosh, there's fire, let's get out of here. So it's something internal. It's not the external source of the motivation. It's not what starts you getting changed inside. The real motivation is what's going on inside, what makes you do something. And that's why they use the word internal. So let's go to the third and the final buzzword that we want to take a look at, and this is the word morale. And with regard to morale, there are 3 subpoints that your textbook wants to make. So let's take a look at each of those subpoints. The first is a definition. What does this word morale mean? Well, the definition of morale is it's one's feelings or attitude about something like a job. One's feelings or attitude about something like a job. Go back to the video that we just saw in Office Space. What type of attitude or feelings did he have about his job? They weren't really very good. It gives you an idea what the morale is like, what his morale is, how he's feeling it, and probably the morale through the whole organization. Let's go to the second point. The second point is a rule. The first point was a definition. The second point's a rule. And with regard to the rule, I'll give you the rule. There's some subpoints to it. The rule: high or bad morale results from the satisfaction or dissatisfaction of one's needs. High or bad morale results from the satisfaction or dissatisfaction of one's needs. Now the textbook has a subpoint and 2 sub-subpoints with regard to that. Let's take a look at them. The subpoint: in business, these needs may be. In business, these needs may be. And the textbook gives 2 examples of these needs in business. First of these subpoints, or sub-subpoints, is ego. You know, in business, people like to have recognition. So with regard to, you did something well, you'd like to have somebody come by and pat you on the back or whatever and say, good job. So that's one of the first needs. The second sub-subpoint that we have here is fear. Fear. In business, you're worried about your financial security, your job security. Am I going to be laid off? Am I going to be able to pay the bills? Where are things going here, etc.? So there's that fear as well. So again, the rule: high or bad morale results from the satisfaction or the dissatisfaction of one's needs. Let's go to the third subpoint under the word morale: the results. The results. Now, before I give you the results that the textbook mentions, let me ask you this. Have any of you ever worked someplace where the morale was really high? Maybe even not even just work there, maybe it was a team that you played on. You were on a baseball team, a football team, a swim team, softball, whatever it might be. Did any of you play or work where the morale was high? Let's flip the coin. Have any of you worked someplace or been on a team where the morale was horrible? It was low, it sucked, it was awful. Well, think about this. How did you feel differently in each of those 2? Where it was high morale, weren't you motivated to go to work and you really liked to get there and you always did the extra effort to make sure it was done well, etc., get along with your buds, etc., that were on the team or in the workplace? But how about bad morale? Go someplace where it's bad morale, it's horrible, you had to drag yourself to work, you didn't want to put in the extra effort, you're looking for other jobs, you're sending out resumes. While you were at work, you did what you had to do to get by, but you didn't do the extra effort, etc. So with regard to this, the results are pretty remarkable. But let's take a look at what the textbook says, because I'm sure you felt that with both high and bad morale, but let's see what the textbook says. They said the results with regard to high morale. They said high morale can lead to dedication, loyalty, and a desire to do well. Dedication, loyalty, and desire to do well. If you work someplace where there's high morale, my guess is you were probably pretty dedicated to the place you worked at or the team you were on. Probably pretty dedicated to the employees you worked with, so there was loyalty there. Go team, go whatever group that you were working with. And there's probably a desire to do well. Hey, listen, when I come up to bat, I want to make sure that I, at least get a hit, maybe a double or maybe score some runs or whatever that we have here. Or at work, hey, I'm going to get this job done. I'm going to get a job done early, and it's going to be right. It's going to be perfect for what I want to do. So what you tend to see, again, high morale can lead to some great things. Well, let's take a look at low morale and what the textbook says. They said low morale can lead to high turnover, absenteeism, and a poor work performance. can lead to high turnover, absenteeism, and poor work performance. And isn't that what you felt when you worked someplace and there was low morale? Or maybe you're on a team where there's low morale. Think about it. Let's go back to sports teams that you might have been on when you were going through school or whatever. And whether it was a school team or whether it was a community team or whatever, think about it. If there was a team that the morale wasn't very good on, you probably went other places at times. You didn't go to this game because you went to piano lessons. You didn't go to that game because you went to some other sport or whatever. You didn't go to this game because you just didn't want to get out of bed. Well, that's the same thing that you find in work. So again, high morale and low morale, very important aspects with regard to work. So let's go to the bottom line then for all three of these things: motive, motivation, morale. And the bottom line is very important for you and your career. Think about wherever you end up going to work. One of the things that your bosses are going to want you to do is they're going to want you to perform better tomorrow than you performed today. They're going to want you to make more widgets tomorrow than you made today. They want more pizzas made. They want more Buicks made. Whatever it is you're making, they're going to want to see productivity going up. They want you to do better and better. Now, in some places where you work, they do this by throwing money at you. Oh, here's some new equipment for you. Here's some new employees to help you out, etc. But in this day and age, you don't see that happening as much. Businesses, particularly now in this COVID environment, with business being so bad lately, they don't have any extra money, but yet are they telling you, oh, don't worry about productivity? Heck no, they're telling you they still want you to be productive, and they want you to be even more productive tomorrow than you were today. Well, if they're not going to give you more money, they're not going to give you more equipment, more people to do it, how are they going to get you to do better? Put yourself in their boat. How could you get one of your employees to do better? How could you get somebody on your sports team to do better? Well, one of the things you can do, and it's not going to cost you really anything, is to improve the morale and the motivation and to give everybody a motive to do well with regard to this. Think about this with regard to your life, your career, so to speak, that you've been through to this point. Have you ever done something where after you had done it, it was good? Whatever you did, it was at work, you did some extra effort or whatever, some employees, some customers were happy at some team that you were on, you got that hit, you made the touchdown, you recovered a fumble, whatever it might be, and the coach or your boss came up and did nothing more than just pat you on the back and say, wow, it's a great job, thanks so much for what you did. How much did that cost your boss to pat you on the back and say those words? Nothing. But what were the results when that happened to you? Didn't you find that motivated you? That made you want to do better? That got your morale going? And if that's the case, it got your productivity up? So all three of these things are linked very, very closely to this concept of productivity. And none of them really require any extra money to be added to the budget. You can increase your productivity immensely by just looking at motivation, and morale. Okay, let's go to the second major topic under motivation. The first major topic was three buzzwords, three buzz terms or whatever. The second one are motivational principles and theories, perspectives, etc. And we're going to be taking a look at a whole bunch of them. I don't know, I think I have maybe 10 or something like that we're going to go through. And what I'll do is I'll give you the name of it, and then I'll talk to you about it, give you some ideas of what this theory is about, what this perspective is about. And hopefully as we go through, you're going to find that some of these actually make some sense. And they might actually be able to help you out with regard to increasing the productivity wherever you work, increasing the productivity of the team that you're playing on with regard to it. So let's take a look at these. The first of these principles and theories that we have is called Taylor's, and it's Taylors, apostrophe S, Taylor's Income Approach and Scientific Management. Taylor's Income Approach and Scientific Management. Oh boy, doesn't that have a great title to you? Don't you want to just go read that? Well, the interesting thing is there's some cool points that Taylor made in his study. And let's see if we can find that and get rid of the awful title and see if we can find something useful with regard to it. So a couple points I have with regard to Taylor. The first point I have is this was one of the first studies that was ever done on workplace motivation. one of the first studies ever done on workplace motivation. It was done right around World War I. I think it was right after World War I, etc. Up to that point, nobody really studied it. Nobody really cared too much about motivation. They didn't even really identify it. But after World War I, Taylor came along and said, let's do some analysis of this. Let's see if we have an idea what's going on in the workplace with regard to motivation. So what we have is Taylor came up with a couple of really good ideas, little skewed in one way or another, but some really good ideas that you can use now. So let's take a look at some of those. Let's look at the first one. The first thing he concluded involved a presumption he had. And when you go in and you start to do scientific analysis, you should enter into it with presumptions. You know what the answer is going to be, because oftentimes that taints the way your research goes through, and you end up concluding that what you thought before was right. He entered into this, and he kind of concluded before he started that employees are lazy and they absolutely dislike work. And maybe he's right. I know an awful lot of employees who don't like what they do, and they're lazy, they don't like work, etc. But I'm sure there's probably far more who do like their work and aren't lazy. But nonetheless, he made that conclusion. So what he decided to do is he looked at how do we motivate employees. If they're lazy and don't like work, what can we do to motivate them? And he made another conclusion which is somewhat right but somewhat wrong. And he said that the only way, and that's the big problem I think with his theory, the only way to motivate workers is through money. Give them more money and they'll be happier, they'll work more, etc. They won't be lazy or whatever. And he said if that's the case, one of the big problems that we have in the United States, and we had it then right after World War I when he did this study, we even have it today, is most people aren't paid based on their productivity. They're paid based instead on a time-based method. You're paid X dollars per hour, X dollars per week, X dollars per year, whatever it is. It's paid on time. So Taylor looked at that and he said, well, wait a minute. If I go into work and I'm paid basically for being there, I'm not paid for making anything new or making things better or making more. I'm just paid for being there. I really don't have an incentive to make more, do better. Just go in, put in my hours, and I'm fine. Now, I can't go in and not do anything. I'll probably be fired, or go in and do a horrible job. I might be fired. But as long as I do a minimum, I'm okay. And that's not a really motivated employee, and that goes back to that Office Space video that I talked about earlier. So what Taylor suggested is something new. It was really a pretty cool idea. He decided we're not going to pay people based on time. We're going to pay them based on productivity. And he came up with this system that has a buzz phrase with it. It's called the Piece Rate System. P-I-E-C-E, Peace, not P-E-A-C-E. But the Piece Rate System. He said instead of paying people per hour, let's pay them for everything that they make. Let's say, for example, we're talking people in the Ford automobile plant, which at the time were making Model Ts. Instead of paying them for every hour that they're at work, pay them for every Model T that they make. Now, indeed, you have a team of people. It's not just one person making a Model T, but you have a team of people working on this. And if you pay them for every Model T that they make, as opposed to just for being there, the odds are, he said, you're going to have more people making more Model Ts. And the more Model Ts that you make, the greater the productivity. And if productivity goes up, you end up seeing costs generally go down, income goes up, business is much more profitable. So he said, let's do this on this piece rate system based on basically paying people based on productivity. Well, there's a problem with that. It's a really good idea, but there's a problem with that. And that problem is most of the laws then and today say that you have to pay people on this time-based method. The minimum wage, $7 or $8 an hour or whatever. You have to pay them on an hourly basis or on a monthly basis, weekly basis, yearly basis, on a time-based basis. And that kind of hurts, but there's a way around it. In fact, some really smart companies have figured it out. And the way around it kind of goes to what you also saw a little bit in that Office Space clip. And that is, okay, let's go in and we'll pay employees based on
an hourly wage or weekly wage, annual, whatever it's going to be, based on time. But let's also build in an incentive system, for everything they do above the norm. They make 5 more pizzas per hour or something like that, whatever it is that they're making. Let's pay them an incentive, some sort of bonus. And this type of incentive system hopefully will motivate them. And a great example of this goes to the steel industry. And of course, around the Pittsburgh area where I'm located, steel used to be king. And one of the things that you see is if I go around and I asked you in class, if we were sitting there together today, and I asked you what's the largest steel company in the United States, the odds are pretty good you're going to say U.S. Steel, United States Steel. And you're not too far off. U.S. Steel used to be the largest producer of steel in the United States, but now it's number 2. The number 1 steel producer in the United States is a company you may never have heard of before. It's called Nucor Steel. Nucor spelled N-U-C-O-R. It's an abbreviation. It used to be called the Nuclear Corporation of America. They did other things back then, so it was called Nucor. They just shortened it, so it's Nucor Steel. Well, how did Nucor, which a company that most people have never heard of, become the number 1 steel producer in the United States? Well, it did a number of things, but one of the key things is it has a huge incentive system. Let me give you an example of this. If you're going to get a job, if they were hiring right now, of course, with the COVID problem, they're not, but let's say they were hiring and you went there to become, say, a laborer or whatever. You go to U.S. Steel and they probably tell you something like, okay, we'll pay you $22 an hour. And there's some benefits and whatever, but we'll pay you $22 an hour. And let's say across the street there was a Nucor steel plant. Let's say that they're hiring for the same position. If you go there, they say, okay, great, yeah, we have the same position, wonderful, etc. But we're going to pay, and it's usually much less. I'm just going to, make up a number here, say $12 an hour. Well, where are you going to work? Of course, you're going to go across the street and work at U.S. Steel. They pay $22 an hour. You're going to make more money, right? Well, maybe not. Nucor builds into its facilities a huge incentive system, massive. All sorts of things are incentivized. And the interesting thing is, most Nucor steel workers at the end of the year, even though they're making less per hour than a steel worker at United States Steel, most Nucor steel workers, their end of the year income is far in excess of U.S. Steel. Let's say that the normal U.S. steel worker is making $60,000 to $80,000 a year. At Nucor, you're probably making $80,000 to $105,000 a year. And it's because of the incentives. They have huge incentives. Well, with the incentives, maybe that's why Nucor is the largest steel company, makes the most steel in the United States, because they're incentivizing. Now, what they did is they knew that we couldn't pay anything less than minimum wage and other things, because everything's based on this hourly basis, based on our laws. So what they do is they pay low on the scale. They're still within the law. They don't go below minimum or anything, but they pay low, and then above that, they highly incentivize things. Number of tons of steel you produce, how many are rejected for quality problems, your attendance, are you there most of the time, or are you absent a lot or whatever. So they have all these incentives, more than what I just said, built into it, and they are the number 1 steel producer in the United States right now, maybe because, at least in part, what Taylor was saying with regard to this piece rate system. Taylor, though, however, says something else, something also is kind of brilliant with regard to it. Think about this. Taylor does his project right after World War I. So, we had all these soldiers, etc., over there, in France, fighting the Kaiser and the Germans or whatever. And after World War I, they're coming home. So one of the things they wanted to do is they wanted to do all sorts of studies about what worked and what didn't work in the army when they were in France. And one of the things that they were looking at is the speed that the troops would move. Let's say, for example, I have a squad of soldiers, and the squad of soldiers is here, and I want them to go to the hill over here. How long is it going to take them to go that far? Now, if I asked you, in fact, let me just take it with you. Look out the window wherever you are now, and look down the road. Maybe you can see a building or something, a tree, whatever. that's maybe a tenth of a mile away, maybe a little bit longer. And if I asked you, hey, listen, let's take a team of students that you were on. Maybe in a prior term you had a team of students together. Let's take that team, and let's say that your team is going to run from your house right now to that tree, that building that you see that's about a tenth of a mile away, and I asked you how long is it going to take you to get there. Most of you would probably sit back and say, well, how the average speed of a human being is this, and this, that, and the other. And so I think we're going to be able to do it. You do some sort of mathematical calculations, how far it is it raining and snowing, and all this other stuff. Taylor says that's nonsense. He said the fastest speed that team is going to get there is the speed of the slowest member. Because you got to get the whole team there, right? So if you have, let's say, a team of 5, and let's say that 4 of you are fast as can be, but you have somebody on it who's not very fast, a slow runner or whatever, for whatever reason. Well, how fast is your whole team going to get to that tree down the street or whatever? It's going to be the speed of the slowest member. So what Taylor says, listen, most managers, when they incentivize things, when they go and they praise people, when they try to motivate people, they oftentimes focus on the best performer, the fastest runner, so to speak, the one who makes the most widgets, the most pizzas, whatever it is that you're doing. And that's not a bad thing. But Taylor said, think about this. What we probably ought to do is we probably ought to focus our incentive system, our motivation, not just on the best performers, but on the worst. Because if we can find a way to make that slow runner on our team run even a little bit faster, then our whole team produces more. We're there faster. We get there faster with regard to it. For example, let's say we have your team, and we're going to have your team run against another team that was in your class. Which team is going to get there faster? Well, let's say that you have a slow runner on your team. 5 really fast people, but there's one who's, great person, but the person just is not fast. Well, what could you do to make sure your team gets there faster? Well, you're going to focus on how I'm going to make that slowpoke run faster. Maybe we could do some training. Maybe we get some better shoes or something like that. Maybe just encouraging words. Heck, maybe you just go and you pick the person up, and the 4 of you carry that person, whatever it might be. Maybe get some roller skates or something like that, whatever you can do. Because if you can get that slow person going faster, the odds of you beating the other team increase considerably. So what he's saying under this concept that he has, which by the way has a buzzword too, it's called soldiering. Soldiering, and that's where you focus on the slowest mover on your team, the slowest member, the worst performer, whatever on the team. If you do that and you can improve that person's performance, increase their speed, whatever it is that you're trying to do, then the whole team does better. Now, one last thing, and I think that's pretty brilliant, because again, so many places I've worked at, the top performers get a pat on the back. Well, that's great, but the slow performers, the ones who aren't doing really well, they're not given really any incentive. Oftentimes, they might be criticized, which might be a negative incentive, but they're not really helped out in any way to go a little bit faster, do things a little bit better. Now, one of the things that I will mention is Taylor took that good idea and he added something to it, and I'm not so sure that it really fits. He said, listen, with regard to that slowest member on your team, after trying to help him or her get faster, do better, whatever it might be, if he or she doesn't, then what you're going to do is you're going to fire that person. I'm not so sure that's a great idea. Certainly by getting rid of that slow poke, your team now has 4 and you're going to get there faster, but I'm not so sure that's the best way to do it. It might be something you keep in your mind as you get into your managerial careers, but I think probably at least initially you want to focus extensively on trying to find ways to help motivate that person to go faster and help that person to go faster. Hopefully that makes some sense with regard to that. So what Taylor said has an awful lot of real smarts in it, really good ideas that he has. So let's move then to our next theory, our next principle that we want to look at in motivation. And the first one, again, was Taylor's income approach in scientific management. The next one's going to be called Mayo's human factors approach in Hawthorne studies. Mayo's human factors approach in Hawthorne studies. And Mayo is spelled M-A-Y-O, M-A-Y-O, kind of like for mayonnaise, it started off. And again, here's another horrible name, right? Who wants to learn anything called human factors approach in Hawthorne studies? But again, Mayo came up with some pretty good stuff. So let's take a look at what he said and compare some of it with what Taylor said. One of the things I'll mention is Mayo did his studies, I guess, in the 30s and the 40s, maybe a little bit in the 50s, and he had taken a look at what Taylor had written and thought some of it was really brilliant. He liked I believe, the soldiering part. He liked the piece rate system. But he also said, hey, wait a minute, there's something awful wrong here, Taylor. People are in the workplace, workers are not just motivated by money. There's other things that motivate them. So I'm going to go and I'm going to prove it. So Mayo went to a textile plant, someplace where they sew a lot of dress shirts, men's dress shirts together. He went to a place, I think it was in Hawthorne, Illinois. I think that's where we get the idea of the Hawthorne studies. And he goes to this textile plant, and he goes into a mill building, not unlike the steel mill buildings you might see around here, many of which sadly are closed, but a really long building that instead of filled with, say, steel equipment and furnaces and things of that nature, filled with sewing machines. With just one sewing machine next to another, and just rows and rows and columns of people sitting behind sewing machines. Now, this building was set up so although it ran straight like this, it was divided into three sections that ran like this. They're all together. You had section A, and then you had the middle section, section B, and then you had the end section, which would be section C. So it had A, B, and C. And again, it just ran the entire length of the building. So what he did, and by the way, these sections, they have kind of a buzzword to them. They're called bays. So you have Bay A, Bay B, Bay C, etc. With regard to it, you have these bays. So what he decided to do is he went into this plant, and again, let's say it's around World War II sometime, a little bit before, a little bit after, whatever. And he goes into this plant, and he goes in Bay A. He takes the lighting in Bay A, and he makes it brighter. I want you to think about this. These are all these people that are working, a minimum of 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and probably back then it was even more. They're probably working, instead of 8-hour days, maybe 10 hours or 12 hours. And instead of working 5 days a week, some of them certainly were probably working 6. Some might even be working 7. So what you end up having is if you're sewing a lot, you got to thread the needle, you got to watch where you're sewing, you got to get a straight line, etc. And it's pretty intensive with regard to the eyes, watching to make sure that all the needle and the thread and the cloth are all meeting at the right place at the right time. So what he did in Bay A, as I said, is he made the lighting brighter, made it easier for people to see what they were doing. Certainly improved the working condition there. He then went into Bay B, which had approximately the same number of workers. All these bays had about the same number of workers. He goes into Bay B, and he dims the lighting. It was already dim, and now he makes it so dim it's almost dark. And think about it, the other two bays, A and C, are on the outside, so they might have some window light coming in. The middle one, though, Bay C, has no windows whatsoever, so it was dependent basically on the lighting in the building. And he dims it. So it's so dark, they literally have trouble seeing a needle and to put the thread through. So it makes it much, much more difficult to work. In Bay C, though, he does nothing. This is going to be his control group. This is going to be the group that nothing happens, so we're making the assumption that their productivity is not going to change. And he goes into this, and he has an assumption. Again, you probably shouldn't go in with assumptions, but he does. He has the assumption that in Bay A, where the working conditions got better, that productivity will go up. In Bay B, where working conditions got much worse, productivity is going to go down. And then in Bay C, where nothing changed, productivity is going to stay about the same. That's what he thought. So he goes and he does this stuff with the lighting, and they do it for, I don't know, a number of days, number of weeks or whatever. And after it's all done, they count the number of shirts that were done, with the expectation Bay A will have more shirts done, Bay B will have fewer shirts done, Bay C about the same as before. And that's not what he finds out. He finds out that in Bay A, indeed, the productivity did go up. They made far more shirts than they had before. So that made sense to him. But in Bay B, where he made it dark and almost impossible to see, productivity went up. They made more shirts too. And in Bay C, where he hadn't changed really anything, productivity plunged. It went straight down the tubes. It was horrible. He understood Bay A, but Bay B, how did you get better? I made it worse. In Bay C, I didn't change anything. Why did you get worse? Why do you think that occurred? I mean, if you were in Bay B and it got darker, wouldn't you think that it'd probably be harder for you to make as many shirts as you did before? And if you're in Bay C and nothing changed, don't you think you'd probably do as much work as you did before? So he went and he asked the workers. And of course in Bay A, they said, well, we did better because working conditions got better. But in Bay B, where productivity improved when it should have gone down, he asked the workers, what the hell happened? And they said, they'd been working there for 10 years, 15 years, sometimes 20 or more. And they said nobody ever paid attention to them before. This is the first time anybody paid attention, so they're all excited and they wanted to do a good job. So their productivity went up, not because of working conditions. It went up because of recognition. They got some acknowledgement. And then he goes into Bay C and he said, what the hell happened? Nothing changed and your productivity fell. And they basically said, hey, you spent all your time looking at Bay A and Bay B. You didn't spend any time with us. To hell with you. We didn't care, so we just pretty much let things slide. And that's why it went down. So why did it go down there? The lack of acknowledgement, recognition, etc. So what we end up seeing here is Mayo end up proving his point. More than money motivates. Working conditions certainly motivate. Acknowledgement, recognition motivates. And there's probably some other things too. So it's a great study with regard to that. You want to keep in mind, does that mean money doesn't motivate? No. It does motivate. Taylor had his finger on a good pulse there. It motivates oftentimes in a great way. But there are other ways to motivate too. And Taylor focused on the money. We saw Mayo found there are two other ways to motivate: working conditions and recognition. So let's now go to the next of these theories, etc., that we have. Okay, let's go to the next of these motivational principles and theories. And this next one is called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, and Maslow is spelled M-A-S-L-O-W. Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. If any of you have taken any psychology courses, psychiatry courses, anything of that nature, maybe organizational behavior, you probably ran into this theory before. Maslow did an awful lot of very well-known research with regard to motivation, particularly the hierarchy of needs. So let's talk about how Maslow's hierarchy of needs fits the workplace. Maslow agreed with Mayo. He said, hey, listen, more than money motivates. Certainly, as Taylor said, money does motivate, but more than money motivates. There are other needs that employees have that have to be fulfilled. Have to be filled. And if they're not filled, then their motivation drops and morale drops. But if they are filled, then the motivation goes up, right? Morale goes up. So there are a number of needs. And he said, and that's in addition to, it's not just recognition, it's not working conditions, there are other needs as well. And he said that what we could do is, he said, not only can we list these other needs, we can actually categorize them and put them into groupings, so to speak. And looking at the groupings, we can also probably prioritize them. There's some groupings that are just base needs. You actually have to have this. And then there are others that, well, maybe we need that next or final, and etc. And what he did is he put together a pyramid of needs, Maslow's pyramid of needs. And for our purposes, we're going to look at basically 5 levels of the pyramid, 5 steps, etc., as you go to the top. And these needs are, let me first give them to you in the 5 steps. I'm going to start at the bottom and work to the pinnacle at the top. The lowest level need, the base need, when I say lowest doesn't mean it's the worst need, but it's the base need, is the physiological needs. Physiological needs. These needs in the workplace, we're talking about wages bring you food, they bring you shelter, they bring you clothing. These are the base needs that everybody has to have. If you're not eating, you can fill all these other needs. It doesn't matter. You still need to eat. So the base needs are these physiological needs. The next level up that we have are called safety needs. Safety needs. And in the workplace, Safety needs actually include more than what might be obvious. Certainly, we need a safe working conditions. We don't want to go into work and have to worry about, our arm's going to be pulled into a machine or something's going to explode or we're going to breathe some stuff that's going to cause us cancer or whatever. So we certainly have safe working conditions, but there are other things too that are in the safety needs. We need job security. We don't want to be fired. We don't want to be laid off. We want to depend on this income coming in. We need health insurance. If we get sick or whatever, who can pay in this day and age? When an aspirin costs, what, $500 or something at some hospitals, and it's absolutely ridiculous. So we want to have health insurance. In addition to that, we want to have pensions, some sort of retirement income. Because sooner or later, no matter how young you may be now watching this video, you're going to go like that, and next thing you know, you're going to be my age or older, and next thing you know, you're going to be thinking about retirement. So we want to have some sort of pension or retirement income as well. The next level up, after we have the physiological needs and the safety needs, the next level up, the third level as we go closer to the top, are social needs. Social needs. This includes such things as being liked by your fellow employees. Maybe they don't all love you, but you get along well, right? No one's fighting. It's not a horrible place to go. Your bosses work with you well, and you like your bosses. Your employees work with you well, and you like them. Your colleagues work well, etc. So you have the social needs that we have. And if you think about it too, right now, with regard to the COVID crisis and so many people being home, and many people being alone at home, this is certainly something that they miss. You're, my gosh, I want to go in because I want to talk to my coworkers or whatever. The social needs. The next level up, the fourth level that we'll go to of the 5, is called the esteem level, esteem needs. And with regard to esteem, here you want respect and recognition for your accomplishments, respect and recognition for your accomplishments. And you get these through such things as promotions and awards and acknowledgement. Even just a pat on the back. Respect and recognition for your accomplishments. This all goes to your esteem. The very top of the pinnacle, the last of the needs, very top, is called self-actualization. Self-actualization. And the best way to look at this insofar as employees is you want an opportunity to grow and develop. You want to reach for all you can reach. You want to be all that you can be, etc. Self-actualization. Now, one of the things that Maslow said is not only do we have this priority of needs from the base up to the top, not only do you have to, as a manager, as a leader of business, you have to fulfill those needs to help have motivated employees and high morale in the workplace. He also said you have to start at the bottom and work to the top. You can't skip levels. For example, one of the things right now, let's talk about Bill Gates. Bill Gates certainly is at the top of the game, right? If he's not the wealthiest person in the world, he's close. So if you went to Bill Gates and tried to motivate Bill Gates and said, hey, listen, I'm going to increase your wages, Bill Gates doesn't care. But if you went to Bill Gates and said, hey, listen, you and your wife, I think it was Melinda, something like that, if they have this nonprofit trying to help people throughout the world. If you went there and said, hey, listen, I'll donate money to it, I've got this great idea that's going to help you promote this, that all of a sudden, that might motivate him. So wherever you're on the on the need scale, if someone tries to motivate you on a different level, it probably isn't going to work. For example, again, going back to the employee who barely can get food on the table. He or she doesn't care a lick with regard to the esteem things. Oh, it's nice to be patted on the back, but I didn't eat yesterday. So what you want to do is you want to fill these levels from the base up. Another thought that he has is you should keep in mind that when you look at the employees you have in your workforce, not all employees are at the same level. You have some on level 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5 or whatever. So if you try to incentivize them, one of the things you better recognize is one size doesn't fit all. One incentive program won't help everybody on all levels because everybody has different needs on these different levels that you have. And the last thing that he mentions here is you should keep in mind that employees change levels over time. You might be on level 3 this year and level 4 next year, and all of a sudden you get laid off and you're back to level 1 or whatever. So you change. So what motivated Bill and Sally last year might not motivate Bill and Sally this year because there might be a change. I mean, think about this from a motivation standpoint. Go back, probably, 15 years ago. You're probably, getting ready to enter into, kindergarten or first grade. And if your parents wanted to motivate you at that point, they might say, hey, if you don't clean up your room, then you don't get to stay up tonight and watch Blue's Clues. Oh, geez, my gosh. So there's motivation. Okay, now that you're at home now with your parents, maybe you're living there during this COVID crisis. If your mom and dad came to you and said, hey, if you don't clean your room, you don't get to watch Blue's Clues. You don't care. You don't want to watch Blue's Clues with regard to it. So one of the things you have to keep in mind is, again, over time, people change on these various levels that you have. So again, Maslow has a pretty good idea. You should look at how your employees, each employee has different needs, put them on the scale, prioritize, etc., as they move up. And keep in mind that one incentive plan probably is not going to fit all. You're going to probably have to have multiple different types of incentive plans and motivational plans in place. Okay, we've looked at a couple of motivational theories already, right? We've looked at Taylor, and we've looked at Maslow, and we've looked at Mayo. Well, let's take a look at a fourth, and this is called Hertzberg's motivation hygiene theory. Hertzberg's motivation hygiene theory. Hertzberg is H-E-R-Z, B-E-R-G, H-E-R-Z, B-E-R-G. Motivation hygiene is a hyphenated word, either two words connected by a hyphen or one word with a hyphen in the middle, however you want to look at it. Hertzberg's motivation hygiene theory. Let's talk a little bit about what Hertzberg did. Hertzberg, by the way, was a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh for a short period of time, and I mentioned, I think earlier in my introductory video, that although I teach at Penn State now, I actually did teach some time at Pitt as well. So Hertzberg wasn't there when I was there, but he was there. Hertzberg basically said, listen, all these other theories are great. They have some shortcomings and some good things or whatever, but generally speaking, they're great. Basically, they're saying in the workplace there are a lot of needs that one has. If you fulfill those needs, if the employee becomes satisfied, usually his or her motivation goes up, his or her morale goes up, productivity oftentimes goes up. If his or her needs are not satisfied, he or she becomes dissatisfied, he or she becomes, you might call it demotivated, and also the morale drops. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to take a look at the various needs that people have. And Maslow did that, right, when he ranked them and all, and so did the others. But Hertzberg said, it's interesting looking at the relationship between what satisfies you and dissatisfies you. If you sat down and wrote a list of the things at work that satisfy you, we'll call those motivators, those motivational factors. If you wrote down a list of things at work that dissatisfy you, those are called hygiene factors. That's where he gets his name, motivation hygiene. And those dissatisfy in the workplace. And he said, there's probably a 180-degree relationship between each. For example, in the workplace, if you're paid a lot, you're probably satisfied. If you're satisfied, oftentimes you find your motivation is high and morale's high. If you're not paid very well, you're paid low on this totem pole, you can barely make ends meet, paying your bills or whatever, you're probably dissatisfied, your motivation might be lower, and your morale might be lower. So one of the things he said is, okay, there's an example. If I have pay, I'm motivated. If I don't have pay, then I'm not motivated. Paying me is a motivational factor, not paying me is a hygiene factor. And there's a 180-degree relationship. Have it, don't have it. So he thought, it's probably true of most of the other needs in business. So he went around and he surveyed a lot of employees, and he asked them to write down a list of those things in the workplace that satisfied them, the motivational factors. And then he asked them to write down a list of those things in the workplace that dissatisfied them, the hygiene factors. And he thought, well, okay, after we're done, I'll compare. We'll probably see the opposite. You have it, I'm happy. I don't have it, I'm upset. I'm not happy, I'm dissatisfied. So what I want to do now, before I go on with my lecture, is I actually want you to do Hertzberg's test. I'm going to pause the video for a moment, and I'm going to ask you to pull out a sheet of scratch paper or whatever, and I want you to put a line right down the middle, and on one side of it, I want you to write those things that satisfy you in the workplace, the motivational factors, and on the other side, things that dissatisfied you in your employment that you had in the past, your job or whatever, the hygiene factor. So why don't you do that? Why don't we just limit it to 5? Write down 5 things that satisfied you, and then write down 5 things that dissatisfy you in the workplace, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about that. So let's come back now. How'd you do on your list? You write down 5 things that satisfied you and 5 things that dissatisfy you. Did you find when you looked at the list that everything on the one side of the list was a complete opposite of everything on the other side? Did you find that 180-degree relationship that Hertzberg was talking about? Well, if you're like my other students, you're probably going to find out that the answer is no. There certainly were probably some things, but you'd probably say there are a lot of things that weren't there. And let me give you an example here, and this involves something in my personal life, my family life. My wife and I, as I mentioned earlier, we left Ireland back in 1990. We have 2 boys who now, one just got out of college and the other is a senior in college at Penn State. Let's go back when they were much younger, when they were probably someplace in elementary school. The way that I had set up my schedule at that time, I was working at Pitt and teaching, and my schedule was set up that I might teach early in the day, then I'd have even early afternoon, but then I'd have the mid-afternoon and early afternoon off, then I might have a class in the evening. This allowed me to be at home when our boys came home. My wife worked at a hospital, and she wasn't there at the time. She would be able to be home in the afternoon when the kids came home, and I thought it was important to be there, to welcome them in the door. So one of the things that they'd do when they'd come home, etc., is we'd have some snacks or whatever, and we'd talk a little about their day, and then they'd scurry off to either play some games or play with their friends or do some homework or whatever it might be. And then a little bit later, oftentimes, even if I was teaching, right before I'd leave to go teach an evening class, my wife would come home, and one of her pet peeves at that time was she'd come in the door and she'd look over in the kitchen, and she'd see that the kitchen sink was just filled with dirty dishes, and she was always upset and yelling and screaming and whatever at my wife and my sons and I. Why can't you clean the dishes? Why does this, work all day and the dishes are never clean or whatever? So one day my sons and I had a brilliant idea. Finally, we had an epiphany, light shone on us. Geez, why don't we do the dishes before Mom gets home? So we the 3 of us went there, and we went through all the dishes, and we washed them, and we dried them, and I don't think we broke any, but I'm not sure, but then put them away, etc. And we were just pleased as punch. Oh, look at this. Mom's going to be so happy. And a little bit later, Mom came in the door and looked over, and she saw that the sink was empty. Do you think that she was happy? No. She started looking around saying, well, why didn't you vacuum? Why didn't you pick up the clothes? Why didn't you do the laundry and all these other things? Now, if you think about that, when she came through and she said those things, my sons and I had expected, oh, Mom's going to be happy, and she wasn't. Well, isn't that kind of like what you found on your list? There's some things on your list that if you don't have them, they dissatisfy you. Having clean dishes when you come home, dissatisfy you. But if you have it, you're not happy. It's not making you joyous. It's not moving you from upset to, joyous. It's just moving you from being really upset to less upset, maybe neutral. But it's not really making you happy. Well, that's what he found when he looked at his list, too. And this really surprised him, because he thought that, hey, if you're a manager, what you want to do is look at your employees list, and they don't like they want this and don't have it, so they're upset with it. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to give it to them, and now they're going to be satisfied, and they're going to be motivated, etc. And he found out that's not the case. Surely there are some things where if you don't have it and I give it to you, yes, you're going to be satisfied and you're going to be happy, but a lot of things aren't. And a lot of managers had done that. They put together these incentive programs thinking, oh, my employees are going to be so happy with this. And what they found out is, like my wife, they really weren't happy. They were less, pardon my language here, less ticked off, less angry, but they weren't happy. They had moved from -4 on the anger scale to maybe a -1 on the anger scale, maybe even a 0. But they did go to a +1 or a +2 on the happiness scale. So what a lot of managers were doing is they looked at that and said, oh, geez, my employees, they're awful. You know, if I gave it to them and it didn't do anything with it, to heck with them. I'm not going to do that again. And if you think about it, initially, the initial reaction that my sons and I had is, hey, we were thinking Mom was going to be all happy. When she came in the door and she wasn't, we thought, oh, well, that's it. We're not doing the dishes again. Of course, it did occur to us, hey, this was still the right thing to do, and Mom might not be happy, but she was less ticked off. She didn't scream as much, perhaps, when she came through the door. So what we're seeing here is something that Maslow was pointing out. Hey, managers, if you see a need in the workplace and you fulfill it, and then you don't see your employees becoming happy, don't think that your incentive program failed. Don't think you shouldn't do it again. Don't think like Fogarty and his kids that you shouldn't wash the dishes again. No, wash the dishes. Keep this incentive program. You have improved things. You might not have taken someone from a -4 to a +3, but you took them from a -4 to maybe a -1. And that's an improvement. Things are still getting better in the workplace. So what he found, the main bottom line is, hey, with regard to satisfaction and dissatisfaction between motivation and hygiene in the workplace, there's not always a 180-degree line. You have it, you don't have it. Don't have it, I'm upset, I'm in the negative. Have it, I'm in the positive and unhappy. It's not always going to be that way. Nonetheless, you should still have those incentive programs. Nonetheless, Fogarty and your kids, get off your butt and go clean the dishes. Great, now let's go to our fifth of these principles and theories or whatever. We just finished off with Hertzberg, a little bit before that, Maslow and Mayo and Taylor or whatever. Now we're going to go to, as I say, the fifth one. It's called McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. McGregor, if you play golf, you've heard of McGregor, a lot of McGregor golf clubs that are out there, etc., and golf bags or whatever. It's McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Now, McGregor did something different than the other four, the prior people who did these studies. And McGregor's studies are sometime in the 1960s and 70s with regard to it. The prior studies all pretty much focused on employees, what satisfied, dissatisfied them, what needs they had, all these other things like that. McGregor said, you know what, let's not look at employees so much this time. Let's look at their bosses. Let's look at their managers. And let's take a look and see, does a type of manager, does the type of manager you have, the type of boss you have, does that impact an employee's level of motivation and satisfaction in the workplace, employees' morale? So McGregor went out and he studied managers and leaders and bosses, etc., in all sorts of different jobs all over the place. And he came back and he concluded that there basically are two types of managers, two types of leaders, two types of bosses. He said one type is called the Theory X type, and the other type is called the Theory Y type. Theory X and Theory Y, that's where we get the name of his principle that he has here. So let's take a look at that. What is a Theory X manager? What is a Theory Y manager? A Theory X manager, some of the characteristics of it. He or she believes that his or her employees dislike work. They're lazy, they're slouches, not unlike what Taylor thought. He or she, the employees, they dislike work. They're not committed. Another thing too, right? They're not committed. They have no loyalty. They're here just to make the buck. They don't want to be here. They're not committed. They don't care about me. They don't care about the business. They're not committed at all. Another thing that he concluded is that given that, employees need a lot of external control. I have to watch them like a hawk. I have to be looking over their shoulders. I have to micromanage them. And as soon as they get out of the line, man, I got to smack them on the head, kick them in the butt, I got to yell at them, I got to scream at them, or whatever. This is the only way that they're going to be motivated. And they need this external control. They need me there to tell them what to do, because otherwise they're not going to really do anything. That's a Theory X manager. A Theory Y manager is a lot different. A Theory Y manager believes that his or her employees want to be involved. They want to like their workplace. Hopefully they do, and hopefully they are. But they, if not, they want to. He said they're actually pretty good people. That the employees indeed are or can be very committed. They want to be loyal. They want to be part of this. And also, this Theory Y manager believes, employees can't control themselves to a great degree. I have to be around a little bit and set up some parameters or whatever, and look out on occasion. But for the most part, I can delegate some authority to them. I don't have to watch them like a hawk. I don't have to watch them over their shoulder every minute of the day. I can give them some control. I can be a little decentralized with regard to this. Again, we have to have certain limits, but nonetheless, they're okay. They'll get things done on their own. Employees indeed can be very good. So I want you to think about the difference between a Theory X manager and a Theory Y. In fact, think about it. You probably have had Theory X teachers. All students are stupid and they don't want to do anything. And Theory Y teachers, hey, students are great. Give them this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden they'll take off or whatever. Theory X and Theory Y teacher. Now I want you to think about it. Whether you worked someplace in the past where you had a Theory X or Theory Y manager, or maybe you have a teacher who is a Theory X or Theory Y teacher. Even with coaches, Theory X coaches, they don't know anything. I got to scream and yell them all the time. Or, oh yeah, you know what? They're a pretty talented group of people for the Theory Y. With regard to this, who did you respond to better? As an employee, as a team player, or whatever, as a student, did you respond better to the Theory X or to the Theory Y? Manager, boss, coach, whatever it might be, teacher, etc. I think you'll find that most students say that in most cases, not necessarily all, they generally think that a Theory Y is better. So if you saw an example or a question on a quiz, which one's better, I think most students would jump to a conclusion that Theory Y is better, and I'd probably say that probably in most cases that might be true, but not in all. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of a medieval philosopher, political philosopher named Machiavelli. Machiavelli was way back, when it was in Italy, before Italy was Italy. Italy was all these little fiefdoms and kingdoms and whatever. They called them city-states or whatever. It wasn't a country yet. It was all little fiefdoms and city-states or whatever. And each of them was run, at that time, I don't think we saw much gender equality. Virtually all of them were run by men, kings and princes or whatever. So Machiavelli wrote this book called The Prince. And what he did is he went around and he did studies on the various princes and kings of these city-states, of these kingdoms or whatever, to see their type of leadership. What style did they have? And Machiavelli concluded that there were basically two types of princes, two types of kings, two types of leaders. And that this applies today, whether we're talking just as he did, that non-gender neutral thing when he was looking at men, or today when, thank goodness, it is gender neutral, we have both men and women as leaders. This applies both to men and women. He said there were two types. He said one type is the lion, and the other type's a fox. A lion is a type of leader who roars loudly, and he or she's in your face. You know from the beginning what he or she wants to do, and where you're going, and who's going to do what, and all this other stuff. Very strong, outward-going type of leader. The fox, on the other hand, is a leader who leads behind the curtain, so to speak, under the table or whatever. He or she leads more by manipulation, getting people to do things, and there's very little roaring going on here. Now, he also went around and said, hey, what type of leader do you think is best? And most of the people then, including most students now, say, oh, I think the lion's better. Well, he concluded, quite rightly, that the best leader is not a lion nor a fox. The best leader is a leader who can be a lion when you need a lion, You can be a fox when you need a fox. There are times when you lead, you need a leader who's a lion. And there's times when you need a leader who's a fox. Well, that same type of theory, that Machiavellian type of theory, applies with regard to theory X and theory Y. Is the best leader a theory Y? Machiavelli would say no. Machiavelli would say the best leader is not a theory X or a theory Y. It's someone who can be an X when you need an X and someone who can be a Y when you need a Y. So you might want to keep that in mind as opposed to jumping to conclusions of which is better. But for those of you who say that more often than not, a Y is better, you're probably right. And now that goes to something else, though, with regard to you. What does this teach you? When you get out of school, do you want to be a theory X or theory Y? Probably more so theory Y. But the best is someone who can be a theory Y when you need it, and theory X when you need it as well. So let's go on to our next of these theories that we have. Well, let's now look at the sixth of these motivational theories and principles that we're going to be looking at. And the sixth stays kind of with the alphabet soup. We just had X and Y for theories. Well, the sixth is going to be kind of similar. It's called Uchi's Theory Z. Uchi's Theory Z. Notice X, Y, now we have Z. Uchi, by the way, is spelled O-U-C-H-I. O-U-C-H-I. Uchi's Theory Z. Who's Uchi? What's Theory Z? Well, this actually goes back to something. Uchi, by the way, came out with his book Theory Z sometime in the 1980s. And it was based on some things that had occurred in the 1970s. So let's take a look at that to get an idea of what was going on, what got him thinking about these theories, and what's he talking about. In the early 1970s, if you in fact even go back to the 60s and 50s, if you go back and take a look at the automobiles that people drove back then, watch an old TV show, Leave It to Beaver or something like that. The cars back then were huge boats. The bigger the better. And they were gas guzzlers. They oftentimes had fins and things like that. But they were gas guzzlers. You were lucky if you got 5 or 10 miles a gallon on these things. They had huge engines and they were big and bloated cars. And in many ways, I don't want to put them down. If you get to go to a car show, you see that they're really some really nice cars back at that time. But again, they weren't really practical. But the interesting thing was, back then, gas was really cheap. I know that when I first started driving, I was from Ohio, and you could actually start driving then at age 15. You had to be with somebody with a permit, and then at 16 you got your license or whatever. But when I started driving, gas was really inexpensive. It was something like, I don't know, 20 cents, 23 cents a gallon, maybe 28 on the high end. But it was really inexpensive. So you could drive a gas guzzler. Who cared? If it only got a small amount of miles per gallon, because they had big gas tanks, you just fill them up. And even if it had a 30-gallon gas tank, which I think is probably too big for most, but even if it did, if you're only paying 20 cents a gallon, geez, I just spent $6 for a fill up on a 30-gallon tank. That was nothing. Well, in the early 1970s, there was a lot of grief and strife and etc. going on between Israel and a lot of its Arab neighbors. And there was a huge war there in, I guess, 1967, and then another one in 1972 between the Israelis and the Arabs. Well, if you think about it, most of the oil that we got at that time in the United States came from where? Came from the Arab countries in the Middle East. So after, I believe, the 1972 war, they got really mad because, Israel kept winning these wars, and the United States was supporting Israel. Frankly, I think Israel would have won the wars whether we did or didn't. They had some pretty good military equipment, some great training and whatever. But regardless, we did support them. So the Arab countries got really mad at us, and they decided, we're not going to sell you oil anymore. And they had what was called the Arab oil embargo, the Arab oil embargo of 1973 or something like that. So they basically stopped selling us gas. Now, you've all heard of the law of supply and demand in economics. If the demand is high and the supply drops and becomes low, what happens to the price? Well, the price goes up. Well, we had demand in the United States for gas didn't change at all. People were driving these gas guzzlers, so demand remained high. But all of a sudden, the supply went down. We were, getting some, oil from Venezuela, and a couple of the Arab countries were still selling to us, but not much. So the price went through the roof, and people panicked. Let me tell you how bad the price went. Back then, we thought it was horrible. People were taking a bridge or jumping out windows or whatever. They're going bankrupt. It was awful. But the price went up from, as I say, someplace in the 20s. It went up to around 53 to 58 cents a gallon. I mean, today that would be a godsend. But back then it was absolutely horrible. People couldn't afford it. They just couldn't believe what was going on. So all of a sudden, we started to see that people stopped buying these gas-guzzling cars that were made by the American companies, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, or whatever. And for the first time, really, they started to buy cars that were made in Japan. They were economy cars, econoboxes as they called them. Weren't really well styled or whatever, but whereas our cars were getting 8 miles a gallon or so, their cars are getting 20 miles a gallon. So people all of a sudden in the United States stopped buying the gas guzzlers, well, for the most part, and started buying Japanese cars. And eventually the Koreans got into the market, etc. They started buying these econoboxes. Well, what ends up happening? Well, the United States at the time, and I guess to some degree even now, the economy was driven by the automobile manufacturers. They sold lots of cars, and of course they were making money. But then to make a car, they had to buy lots of steel, so a lot of the steel companies were making steel and selling it to them. They had to buy a lot of rubber for the tires, and a lot of copper for the electrical cables, and a lot of plastic, and a lot of paint, a lot of glass, and you can see over and over, they bought a lot of things. So the automobile industry ended up feeding off and growing a lot of other industries, and all these people employed not just by the auto industry, but aluminum and steel and copper and paint and chemicals and rubber, whatever it was. Well, when all of a sudden now Detroit saw its sales plummet because people started buying Japanese cars, Detroit started laying people off. It stopped making as many cars as it did. It's tried to design some cars that were more fuel efficient, but if you take a look at the cars that the United States made in the late 70s, they were pretty awful. They didn't run very well. The fuel economy was a little bit better, but they were very unreliable because people are trying to change technology. So we start buying all these Japanese cars. So in the United States, the economy crashes. We have a huge recession, we have inflation, and it's awful. But over in Japan, the economy booms. I mean, everybody's employed, people are making money or whatever. So in the United States, whenever anything goes wrong, you've got it now with the COVID thing, we're all looking for someone to blame. Whether it's somebody in this political party or that party, someone in power, someone not in power, someone in another country, someone here. We're looking for someone to blame. And at that point, people that we ended up blaming American executives. The Theory A, which was the American theory of business, of managing business, was attacked greatly. Well, let's talk a little bit about Theory A, the Theory A style of leadership and management. This was very Taylor-esque. Employees hate work, etc., and things like that. And it's very X-ish, I got to be there and I got to tell them what to do. Very command-driven. There's a top-down type of hierarchy and decision-making. We were highly individualistic. We didn't have many teams or whatever, and there was no job security. Well, that's Theory A, the American management technique. So as the economy is going to hell in a handbasket, a lot of people are looking around saying, well, what can we do? Well, they're looking at Japan and saying, oh, look, they're booming over there. Maybe what we ought to do is maybe we should adopt Japanese management tactics and strategies or whatever, their leadership style. And this is called Theory J. Now, Theory J was very much Y-ish, so to speak, whereas the other one was Taylor-esque and X-ish. This is a lot of Y-ish, X and Y are kind of like the carrot and the stick, or maybe it's backwards. X is the stick and Y is the carrot. In Japan, we saw it was very, very Y-ish. We saw a lot of team-orienting things going on. It wasn't individualistic at all, very collectivistic, but things were consensual. bottom employees were involved. It wasn't a command down decision. Everybody seemed to have some impact with regard to it, and they had no layoffs. At least at the time in Japan, no layoffs. You graduated, say, from high school, you got a job, say, at Mitsubishi, and you were there, you would never lose your job unless you did something horrible. You'd never be laid off until the time that you retired. So there were no layoffs there. So we said, oh, we've got to adopt these Japanese management techniques and management styles or whatever. We have to adopt Theory J. Well, the problem was a lot of the firms in the United States who tried to adopt Theory J found out it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is not only did we have a difference in the management styles between Japanese managers and American managers, we had a big difference between American culture and Japanese culture. Japanese culture is very collectivistic. They didn't like individualism. American culture was very individualistic. We liked it to, teams are fine, but we're individual. We're, gung-ho, etc. with regard to it. So what we found is that Theory J didn't really fit the American culture. So now we're looking around, what are we going to do? If Theory A doesn't work, if Theory J doesn't work, what should we do? And that's when this American-Japanese writer, this guy named Uchi, came up with a theory. He said, let's do a hybrid of A and J. We're going to call it Theory Z. And I know that when I was in the MBA program at Penn State back in the 80s, this was a big push. Lots of companies were looking at it. In fact, even today, most large and mid-sized companies, in fact, even many small companies, maybe without even knowing it, they follow Theory Z. What is Theory Z? What are the requirements? Someone who's Theory Z, leader, manager, whatever, what do we tend to see? What are the characteristics of Theory Z? Well, let me give a couple of them to you. We normally have informal control of employees. So we're certainly not a Theory X. We're more towards Theory Y. We're giving employees more control, more delegation of authority, etc. that we have. So we're still have the people in charge, but we're giving them more authority, more management control to the employees. Another of the things that we seem to see here is that under Theory Z, we're promoting team building. We're still fairly individualistic in the United States, but we're promoting team building. If you go into most large businesses and medium, and as I say, even some small, almost all of them have the employees divided up into teams to do this, that, and the other. Think about it in business school, those of you who are, say, majoring in business here at Penn State. How many of the classes have you had where you're put on teams to do something? When I was a college student, nobody did anything in teams. It was all individual. Why are they putting college students, particularly business students, on teams? Well, again, this team building is very important under Theory Z. Another aspect here, too, with regard to Theory Z, instead of the old management versus labor, bosses versus employees type of battle that went on, instead of a you versus me type of attitude, under Theory Z, because of the team building, we're trying to make everybody part of one team. Everybody's part of the same family. So instead of a you versus me, we're trying to build in this culture under Theory Z a we and us type of thing. Instead of you versus me, it's we and us. We're in this together. We're all part of the same team, part of the same family. So Theory Z came along, and it actually did get adopted greatly in the United States. As I say, you still see many businesses doing it. They probably have no idea about the name Theory Z, never heard of Uchi or anything nowadays. But a lot of what Uchi talked about, you're going to find in businesses today. It seems to have helped. So if you're going to be a leader and a successful leader in the United States, particularly a business leader, you probably want to take a look at some of these things with regard to Theory Z, including the team building, the familial type of spirit, etc., and delegating some control, some authority to the employees that you have. So that finishes up Theory Z. So let's go on to, I guess it's going to be the sixth major of these principles and theories of motivation. And let's get to that in the next video. Okay, let's now take a look at the sixth of these various motivational theories and principles. This is called reinforcement theory. And this, by the way, is one that, whether you know it or not, you probably have been practicing yourself, and it's been practiced on you, literally from the day that you were born and brought into the world. Basically, what reinforcement theory says is we will reward desired behavior and we will punish, maybe sometimes ignore, but punish undesired behavior. So if you do something good, hey, congratulations, great job. Do something bad, that's bad. You go to your room, you have a timeout tonight or whatever. You do something good at work, congratulations, you got a plaque on the wall. You do something bad, you're laid off, you're fired, you get the office in the back or whatever. So what you see as reinforcement theory is something that you've probably done a lot. And you probably even do it without thinking about it. Think about with regard to friends that you have. Friends who do things that you want them to do, you're probably friendlier with them. Friends who do something that you don't want them to do, well, you might all of a sudden not be friends anymore, not as friendly as you used to be. Well, why? We're trying to motivate people. We want them to do what we want them to do. You do what we want, I want, you're going to get praised. You do what I don't want, and all of a sudden you're going to get some negativity thrown in your direction. That's reinforcement theory. We see it in business all the time. We see it in life all the time, both our professional lives as well as our private lives. So that's the sixth of these motivational theories. Let's go on to the seventh. Well, let's now move, as I say, on to the seventh of these motivational theories and principles. We just finished up reinforcement theory. The seventh one is a good one, too. In fact, I really like the seventh one. The seventh and the eighth are two of my favorites. Not that the others weren't good. I think they are. But the seventh and the eighth I like a lot. But number 7 is called equity theory. Equity theory. And it's talking about treating people equally, treating them with equity with regard to business. So the basic way of looking at that is, and by the way, this applies to both rewards and punishment. So I'll give you the reward side, and then I'll give you the punishment side. Let's take a look at the reward side. If we contribute X and get benefit Y, get paid Y. If we contribute X and get paid Y, we get benefit Y. A colleague doing the same should be paid or get a benefit no greater than what we got paid. So if we do a really good thing and we get a pat on the back, then a colleague who does the same really good thing shouldn't get anything more than a pat on the back. If we go out and we bring in an extra customer and our boss says great job, but somebody else then does the same thing and brings in a customer and all of a sudden gets great job and a promotion, great job comment and then a promotion on top of it, that violates equity theory. We want to treat people the same. Well, let's flip it. That was the reward side. Let's go to the negative side, the positive side and the negative side. If we do bad thing X, and get punished Y, if we do bad thing X and get punished Y, a colleague doing the same should be punished no less. A colleague doing the same should be punished no less. Let me give you a pretty good example of this. You probably have seen it perhaps in your own lives. I'm not sure how many of you have a sibling or two. I was an only child. I don't have any siblings or whatever, but I do have 2 sons, and I have a better idea of what brothers are like, and I suppose sisters would be somewhat similar with regard to siblings. So let me give you an example of something that might have happened to you, but it's going to show you how equity theory comes into play. Let's say that you're in a family and you have 2 other siblings. You're the oldest, you have a middle sibling, and you have the youngest sibling. And the youngest sibling, of course, is called the baby. Even though the baby's no longer a baby anymore, that was the baby, right? The young one. So let's take you in this scenario. Let's go back to when you were, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The middle child was 4 or 5, and the baby was 2 or 3. And let's say mom and you're at home, and mom and dad are there, and it's a weekend, and you and your brothers and sisters or whatever, you and your siblings are kind of roughhousing in one of the rooms. Maybe you have a family room, TV room, or whatever. You're roughhousing a little bit, and your mom and dad are maybe in the kitchen cooking or whatever, and they hear you roughhousing this loud and everything. So they come in and they yell at you, calm down, settle down, watch some TV, stop all this nonsense, just be quiet. So they go back into the kitchen and they're cooking or whatever. Of course, you and your siblings, you're still roughhousing and doing all sorts of things, trying to keep it a little subtle initially, but you're still roughhousing. And all of a sudden, the lamp falls and it breaks. Oh my gosh, it breaks. And, your mom or dad come running in, and this is the lamp that, Great Aunt Harriet or Great Uncle Al or whatever, got, as a wedding gift or something like that. It's invaluable to your parents from a sympathy type of standpoint, but in real life it's probably not worth 10 cents, but it's broken. So they are hugely upset. They're mad. Oh, I can't believe, look what you broke. We told you not to do this. So they start to dole out punishment. Now you're the oldest, so they start yelling at you. You should have known better. You're only, 5 or 6 or something like that. You should have known better. And, your punishment is, and you're going to be grounded for 2 weeks, and you can't do this, and you're supposed to go sleep overnight that night with your buddy. You can't do that. Bang, bang, bang. Same probably for the middle kid. Your punishment, around 2 weeks, and then the baby. Oh my gosh! Oh, they pick up the baby. Oh, it's not. You don't know what's going on. These horrible kids. They told you what to do. You're just a baby. And they slap the baby's hands and don't do that. And, they blow in the ear and they tickle the baby and then they kick the baby out. Is that equal punishment? And what happens if that type of punishment continues year in and year out? All of a sudden now, you're 15, 16, middle sibling is 14. The baby now is 12. So the baby who just came home from a date, just had engaged in oral sex, has been drinking beer, maybe smoking something that's illegal in some states and not in others. The baby comes in, right? And the three of you are doing something and you get in trouble, and once again mom and dad come in and it's the same thing. The older sibling, maybe the middle one, get the same harsh punishment, but the baby is much, much lighter. Not the slap on the wrist before, but still lighter. I want you to think about this. This goes on, to say, time and time again. It goes on for years. Is that fair? The baby no longer is a baby and still getting lighter punishment. Think about how you feel now about the baby who gets away with everything. So many of you would probably now, you're mad at the baby. In fact, when mom and dad leave, you probably go and punch the baby and, take it out on the baby. You can't, who's now, 15 or whatever, but you take it out on the baby. And with regard to your mom and dad, how do you feel about them? You're probably not pleased. You probably think, you favor the other kid or whatever like that, so you're probably not pleased. So think how equity theory impacts your motivation and your morale. And the same goes on in the workplace. If you don't treat your employees equitably, if you don't treat them equally, all of a sudden you're going to find some employees who don't like you because you're not treating them fairly, you're not treating them equally, and they're probably going to start to not like some of the employees who get the favors because they're the baby now. So one of the things you want to be very careful about in the workplace is equity theory. It certainly has a big impact on motivation and morale and productivity in the workplace. Well, let's now go on to, I believe it's the 8th of these theories, and it's called expectancy theory. Okay, let's take a look at this thing called expectancy theory. It's, I believe, the 8th of these motivational principles and theories. And like equity theory, it's one of my favorites. It's not that the others are bad. The others are great. I just particularly like these two. And expectancy theory is something that I think you can use an awful lot as a manager and a leader as you start to develop your career, move up in an organization. Basically, what expectancy theory says is that there are 3 levels of motivation. 3 levels of motivation. But before I tell you what they are, let me give you an example of it, a story involving it, so that you can see it, and then we'll take a look at these 3 levels. My guess is virtually all of you have heard of a former basketball great, a basketball star great that we had, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, when he was playing basketball, was probably the best at the time, might be historically the best ever. You can argue back and forth that certainly he was really, really good with regard to basketball. And he did something really odd, probably about 3/4 of the way through his career when he was basically at the top. He wasn't starting downhill yet. He was at the top and probably still going up a little bit. He decided that he was going to quit playing basketball. He wanted to play pro baseball. Quit playing basketball and started playing pro baseball. Now, he had played baseball in college, but most of what he did in college was basketball. And baseball was not his gig, and he really hadn't played baseball since he got out of college. Now he wants to play. So he played basketball for the team in Chicago, the Chicago Bulls. So the baseball team in Chicago, they have two professional baseball teams, the White Sox and the Cubs. I believe it was the Chicago White Sox go up to him and say, great, you want to play for us? Fine, you have to go through the minor leagues first. We're not going to put you right on the White Sox. And we'll try to get your skill level up and everything. Great. So he goes into the White Sox organization, and he goes to one of their minor league clubs, and he starts to play, and he sucks. He's awful. He's so talented and so athletic, but with his baseball, he plays so much more poorly than he did in basketball. And he was asked, finally, after a while, I think this went on for maybe 2 years, and finally the Chicago White Sox came to him and said, hey, Michael, that's it. It's been fun. Attendance at the minor league games has gone up, and we've made more money, but you don't fit. So Michael quit, went back to play basketball, and did a great job. He was in there for another couple of years, did really well. And somebody right after he goes back to baseball, somebody I believe at ESPN, a reporter goes up to him and asks him, hey, Michael, you're arguably the best at basketball, but baseball, pretty much you suck. What happened? Of course, he's probably ducking when he said this, and Michael doesn't punch him in the chops or whatever. But Michael's answer to it goes to this expectancy theory. And Michael said, well, ever since he was a little kid, and Michael was probably 6 feet high at 3 years old or whatever, but nonetheless, ever since he was a little kid playing basketball, even before the ball came to him on the court, some team player threw it to him. He said a video would go off in my brain, and I would see the ball coming in, and I'd see myself running between players and flying through the air and dunking it through the hoops. I saw this video. He said I never really had to think much playing basketball. It was all this video, the video of play, and I just followed the video. He said I got into baseball, and there's no video. He said I really wanted to do well, but there was no video. So what would happen is he said, let's say I get up to the plate and I'm going to hit the pitch coming in. And even in the minor leagues, pitchers aren't throwing at 100 miles an hour, whatever, but probably throwing in the mid to upper 80s. Some might be even low 90s. He said, I get up to the plate, and the pitcher would be throwing the ball, and even at 85 miles an hour, from the time you throw from the mound to the time it gets to the plate, it's just a split second, right? I mean, it's traveling in there, and it's not that far. And he said, I get there, and the pitcher would start to release, and he said, no video would play, so I had to think about it. Was it high? Was it low? Was it inside? Outside? Was it curveballs? Was it some sort of breaking ball or whatever? He said, by the time I did that, bang, it went behind me. The umpire's calling strike one. Okay, next time, next pitch, right? Okay, pitcher goes to throw it. High, low, inside, out, strike two. He said the video never played. He said I kept striking out. When I did hit it, I didn't hit it very well. I had no idea what was going on because there was no video. Well, let's take a look at what he just said there. And let's see how it fits these 3 levels of motivation and how it might impact you as well as your employees. The 3 levels of motivation will start at the bottom and work to the top. The bottom is someone who's not motivated. The employee doesn't care. It doesn't matter. The second level of motivation is someone who really wants to do well. Hey, yeah, I'm motivated. I want to do well, etc. And that's Michael Jackson playing both baseball and basketball. Really wanted to do well, motivated to get out there and, sink it through the hoops or to hit it over the fence or whatever, really motivated. The third level, which is Michael Jordan playing basketball, but not baseball. The third level is not only do you want to do it, but you really believe that you can do it. You have the confidence that I'm going to do it. I'm going to sink that shot. I'm going to hit that home run. You have the confidence to do it. Michael Jordan in baseball had level 2. He really wanted to do it. But he never reached level 3 because he didn't have the video. He didn't have the confidence. I'm going to do it. He had to think about everything. He wasn't sure about himself. And because of that, he didn't perform as well, nearly as well in baseball as he did in basketball. So this is something for you to think about. Certainly as you manage employees, as you lead people, you're going to have some people who aren't motivated. We can talk about those, and some of these other theories we talked about might be ways to help out, soldiering and other things like that we talked about. But with regard to people who are in level 2, they really want to do well. But they don't have the confidence to make them a level 3 player. What can you do to raise them from level 2 to level 3? What can you do to give them that confidence that they're missing? If you were in class, I would ask you, and before I'd give you the answer, I'd see what your answers were. Of course, because it's online, I can't. But hopefully your answer, hopefully you've given it some thought. Training. Right? Let's train the people. Let's give them a better idea of how to do things and what to do. Maybe give them little opportunities to try things out, baby steps to build their confidence, etc. Mentoring, have others, along the way that can help them out. These are just some of the things that you can do to take an employee who's at level 2 and move him or her to level 3. If you can do that, not only do you have an employee who can play baseball, but you now have an employee who can play baseball really, really well, just like Michael Jordan played basketball really well. Not only can you have an employee who wants to do well in the workplace, you can have an employee who not only wants to, but who can do really well in the workplace. So this concept of expectancy theory, I think, is really important. Well, let's move on then. We'll go to the next of these theories. I think it's theory number 9, and that's called goal-setting theory. All right, let's take a look at the 9th of these theories, goal-setting theory. And goal-setting theory is something that you see in a lot of businesses today. In fact, to some degree, you might even see it a little bit in education as well with regard to students. But you definitely see it in business, maybe even to some degree with sports teams that you've been on, but definitely in business. Well, what is it? Goal-setting theory talks about turning your goal as the leader, your goal as the manager, turning your goal into our goal, turning your goal into the employee's goal. It's no longer you want to do it, your employees want to do it. Let me give you an example first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. The example I have for you involves a youth baseball team that I coached years ago. And these kids, I believe, were probably around the 10-year-old level. It might have been 9 and 10 or 11, someplace in that area. And I had managed a team, actually the first team I managed, the year before, the 7 and 8-year-olds or whatever. I guess it was 9 and 10. And I was an outsider in this organization. I'm from Ohio, and I'm now living in greater Pittsburgh. So I didn't go to the local high school. I didn't know too much about Pittsburgh, and I moved here for a job, etc. that I had. As I mentioned, I taught at Pitt. So I did play baseball when I was a kid, right? So I knew about baseball. So when I moved here, and after a while, I got married and had some kids, and my kids started to get to the point where we're learning sports or whatever. One of the sports that I taught them and that they really liked, still do to this day, was baseball. So there's a local athletic association, and they had baseball teams, organized baseball teams for the kids in the community. And they started off, t-ball around 4 or 5 years old, and then they moved up. So around, the 7 and 8-year-old level, I volunteered. I'd like to be a coach. and went to the athletic association. Hey, you got a team. I played some baseball myself. I'd like to be a coach. Like to work with the kids and whatever. I'm a teacher. I really like helping people in that regard. And I said, well, you didn't go to the local high school. You didn't go to North Allegheny. I mean, we don't know you. And well, thanks so much. We appreciate it. We'll think about it. Well, they did. And they basically just wanted insiders to manage the team, and I guess I was kind of okay with that. But it turned out that one of the managers who's going to manage one of the teams, one of the kid teams, moved or couldn't do it in business or whatever. And they came to me and said, well, listen, we can't find anybody else. You know something about baseball. You indicate an interest. How would you like to have a team? Sure, no problem. Great. So they give me the team, and it was a blast. I loved it, working with the kids and everything else like that. And the interesting thing occurs. Everybody assumed, well, he's from Ohio. He's not from here. So they must have played baseball with sticks and stones as opposed to us with balls and bats. For everybody, what's he going to know? So I end up leading this team. They kind of assumed that I was going to, my team's going to do pretty poorly or whatever, maybe mediocre, but it's certainly not going to be a stellar team because they went to the high school here and they played ball and all this other stuff. So we go through, and guess what team ends up coming in first? Team I had. I didn't do any real magic on it. I mean, I just like working with the kids or whatever, but the team came in first. And that really ticked off a lot of the managers of these other teams, a lot of the insiders. Like, where did this guy do? How did And particularly when my team would beat the team one of them was managing, oh my gosh, they just absolutely couldn't believe it. So the next year, again, I guess going up to the 9 and 10-year-old level, I said, hey, I'd like to have a team. And he said, yeah, okay, we'll give you a team. And what they did is they went around to all the other teams that were moving up, and they took most of the really bad players, and they took them off the teams that were going to be on top, and they gave them and put them on my team. So my team was, not just a rec league team. I mean, my team was pretty awful. And I showed up, for the first meeting of the team, our first practice, if you remember what those are like, the teams that you were on. You do some basic drills. It's more of a breaking ice type of thing where the kids meet the coaches meet the kids, everybody sees who's on the team and whatever. And when I get there, one of the dads who had been with me on the earlier team that had done so well was the coach with me again. And we started looking around at the kids. And we could tell immediately, oh my goodness. I mean, for example, we got there and think, oh, okay, can this kid hit this fast pitch? We got to the point, we weren't worried about the kid hitting the pitch. The kid was so afraid the pitch would come in, the kid was like it was a hand grenade that we just threw at him. So we recognized we had an interesting team. We knew right off the bat what they had done. So at the end of the first practice, we went to the kids, and the kids knew it too. The kids looked around and said, hey, nobody good is on this team. Where is Tom, and where's John, and but they weren't there. They recognized it. So we sat the kids down, in the dugout. Okay, guys, this is what we're going to do and everything. And I said, listen, we basically have, you've had a chance to meet everybody and whatever. And one of the little kids, and they said, yeah, we all suck. Which, if you think about it, do you really want someone who's only 9 years old saying something like that? And the others agreed. They recognized that they all were bad. We had a couple of good ones, but most of them were really, really bad. So I said, well, listen. I said, I told them, oh, of course, no, that's not right. You're all great and whatever. Of course, they didn't believe that. I said, well, listen. We basically have two choices to proceed as we go through the season. One, guys, we can just go through and we can just have as much fun as we can. You see the talent level. We can have as much fun as we can. Or on the other hand, if you really want to try to become competitive, coaches and I will be glad. We'll hold lots of extra practices. You guys have to come to the practices, and we'll try to build up your skills and your confidence or whatever. How do you guys want to do it? Now the parents are back there saying, no, they don't want all these practices. They don't want to have to keep coming to the field or whatever. And most teams back then at that age, during the regular season, they're lucky if they practice once, maybe twice a week, and usually, as I say, it was once if then. So the kids, what do you want to do? Do you want to just have fun, or do you want to do? They all wanted to practice. They wanted to be competitive. They wanted to go out. Because if you think about it, they were as mad as could be because they recognized they had been slotted as losers. I mean, literally, they could have given them caps with the L on it, etc. And they knew that, and they were not happy about that. So we pulled together the team, and we held lots of practices. We might have 2 games a week, and we probably practiced another 3 or 4 days a week. The parents were going absolutely nuts. Kids loved it. We had great practices, etc. So we get into the season, and we go through a season, in lumps or whatever. At the end of the season, guess what team ended up coming first? But it wasn't so much anything I did. I mean, I didn't throw a pitch. I didn't bat once. I didn't catch a ball. I didn't run a base. It was all them. Why did they do so well? Was it because I wanted the team to win? Well, I certainly did. But I don't think that would have motivated them. What really motivated them wasn't my goal. It was their goal. They wanted to win. Think about the same in the workplace. If you go into work and your boss says, hey, I want you all to do this, that, and the other. Great. Okay, wonderful. You're motivated to get that done. But think if instead of it being your boss's goal, it's your goal. You want to outperform the person in the department across the street, your competitor, or whatever. You want to do well. Aren't you going to be more driven, just like this team was more driven to do well? This team of losers all of a sudden came to first place. How did that happen? It was with motivation. It wasn't something I did. It was something they did. Remember, motivation's that internal force? Internally, they wanted to show everybody, we're not the losers you think we are. We want to be treated equally. They were the ones who won. I didn't win a single game. They did. You want to be a manager, you want to be a leader, you want to do the same thing, and that goes to turning your goal into our goal. The last story I have for you here is when I was around 16. I had hair down to here. It was the hippie era and everything else like that. And my mom and dad came into my room, and my birthday was coming up, or they were turning 16, and they said, "Oh, we just got off the phone with your grandmother, my father's mother." And I love this lady to bits. She was wonderful. Her name was Mary, and she's mailing you a gift for your birthday. And like a lot of teenagers and stuff, oh, wonderful. I said, oh, Granny's sending me something? I'm a 16-year-old with hair down to here. What's Granny going to send me? I mean, think about it. What does a 16-year-old boy want? Subscription to Playboy, a pack of beer, and a new baseball mitt or something. Granny wasn't going to send me any of those. So what's she going to send me? A sweater with a bird on it or something like that? Well, eventually it arrived in the mail, and it was just a small package, only about this big. And I opened up the package, and I was surprised, the outside wrapping, and I opened the inside wrapping, and it was a box that was from Spencer's Gift Shop. My grandmother, who grew up and lived in the greater Boston area, was very prim and very proper. Again, a wonderful lady, but very, very prim and proper. I couldn't imagine her even thinking about Spencer's Gift Shop, much less going into it. I mean, if you think about it, Spencer's Gift Shop now, is a kind of a crazy place to go into. Back then, the incense that you find them burning now wasn't incense. It was something that was probably illegal, and they had all these blacklight posters with people half naked having sex or whatever. My grandmother went in there. So it had to be something special. She really wanted to get me something. So what is it? So I opened up the box, and it's a letter opener, an envelope opener. I don't know why they call it a letter opener, but it opens envelopes. It's about this long. It's got like a little knife-like thing here to open it up, and then there's a little wooden dowel that the metal goes into. I'm thinking, oh great, I'm 16 years old. What do I want with this? I mean, first off, Granny or my grandmother's telling you don't write enough. I mean, this is a day before email and whatever. You had to write something, put it in the mail, and send it off. But then I looked at it, and on that little wooden dowel part, there was something in writing there. What it said there goes exactly to this thing about goal-setting theory. And it's something that might help you too. What it said there was diplomacy is the art of letting someone else have your own way. Diplomacy is the art of letting someone else have your own way. It's basically turning your goal into our goal. I've kept that. I still have that someplace around here. I think the metal part broke off, but I still have the wooden dowel with it. Because again, that goes right to this thing of goal setting. You really want to motivate somebody. You don't motivate them by saying, this is my goal. You motivate them by turning your goal into theirs. They really want to do it, they're going to get it done. They're going to move to that next level. So hopefully that will help you. One of the other things I'll mention just in closing is your textbook mentions of different types of management techniques that go hand in hand with some of these. One that you'll find in business that does this as well is called management by objective or MBO. And this is where your boss will sit down with you periodically during your reviews or whatever, and your boss will go over, and between you and your boss, you will set goals for yourself for the next review period, the next year. You'll set up these objectives, but it won't be your boss's objective. It'll be what you and your boss come up together. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to turn your boss's goal into your goal using management by objectives. So let's go on to the next of the legal theories. And this will be the last of the legal theories. The next of the motivational theories, and this will be the last one that we'll be talking about. Okay, we've talked about a whole bunch of principles and theories with regard to motivation. And some of them have been really, I think, enlightening. Some maybe not so much, but even them, you could probably find something to work that might help you. Well, this last of the theories that I have, I think also can help you as well. And it's called McClellan's need theory. McClellan, if you do anything about the Civil War, you might have heard of a General McClellan, who was the head of the Union Army for a while. Not a very good head, but a head of the Union Army. This is McClellan's need theory. It has nothing to do with the general, by the way, just someone has that same name. What McClellan did is said, hey, listen, you know, just like McGregor and everybody else, Maslow, yeah, their needs in the workplace and whatever. But McClellan came up with a completely different set of needs than people talked about before. You know, the need for, you know, recognition, the need for safety and all these other. McClellan came up with some additional needs, some different needs that are really there that you should look at, because if you can fulfill the needs of your employees that have these, you might be able to help to motivate them better. So what needs did McClellan come up with that others hadn't? McClellan basically said that there are 3 additional needs in business that we have to look at. And each of these 3, by the way, has kind of at least 2 of the 3, have kind of a parallel way of looking at things. And I'll tell you what those are as well. So you might say McClellan, instead of having 3, has 5 or 6 or whatever. But let's take a look at the 3 and we'll break it down. The first of the needs that McClellan looks at is he says some people have a really high need to achieve. High need to achieve. And by the way, with regard to these 3 needs, it's not like anybody has none of these. Virtually all of us have a combination of them. But usually you'll find one of them is more dominant than the others. So the first of these is called the need to achieve. Some people have a real dominant need to achieve. Let's take a look at some of the characteristics of somebody who has a high need to achieve. Maybe you do. A high need to achieve some of the factors that we have here. This person wants to accomplish a lot, wants to excel, wants to overcome challenges. This person indeed wants challenges. If you have a work environment that's just mundane, this person is going to go nuts. This person wants to have challenges. This person wants to go faster and farther and wants to surpass others. Everything's a competition for this person. This person likes to be in competition. If there's no competition, this person is just bored out of his or her mind. This person likes competition. This person seeks out situations that require skill and hard work. This person wants to be challenged and wants to use his or her skill and wants to work hard to get something done. This type of person, another characteristic, this person needs a lot of feedback with regard to his or her performance. How well did I do? Did I, where am I? Can I do better? What should I do next, etc. They want lots of feedback with regard to this. You'll find that many people who are entrepreneurs have high needs to achieve. They're driven to come up with that new product and make this one of the best things ever that was ever sold out there. Take a look at a Steve Jobs, or take a look at a Bill Gates or whatever. These people had high needs to achieve, wanted to really come out and wanted to show everybody, look at what I've done, look at what I've done here with regard to it. One of the things you want to be careful about, though, with people high need to achieve, it's great having that in the workplace. But one of the things you want to be careful about, be careful they don't go too far. People with really high needs to achieve want to get the job done whether they have to cut corners or not. Whether it's ethical or not, they will get it done. I'm going to get it done. I don't care if I have to lie, cheat, and steal to get it, but I'm going to get it done. So you want to be careful about these in the workplace. You want someone who has a high level of achievement, but you also want someone whose level of achievement is not going to overrule their rule of ethics or your rule of ethics that you have. Now, I mentioned that there's usually a shadow side, a flip side to each of these needs. Someone has a high need of achievement, someone who's similar, but kind of the shadow side, the flip side of the coin, is someone who has a high fear of failure. A high fear of failure. This person, doesn't want to fail. Failure scares the pants off of this person. This person wants to do everything he or she can do not to fail. And an interesting thing is they oftentimes define failure differently than others. Some students define failure as, I got an F, I got a D, I got a C. Well, let me give you an example. One of my sons, if the son is basically a straight A student, and if he gets an A minus or if he got a B, my gosh, that's failure to him. Well, one of the things you tend to find is people have a high fear of failure. They define failure as something usually higher than what we do. So they're striving to achieve oftentimes the same goals that maybe someone who has a high level of achievement has, but their high need for achievement has, but they're motivated because they don't want to fail, as opposed to they want to get it. It's oftentimes very similar, but oftentimes very different than this concept of the need to achieve. You might have a high need to achieve, you might have a high fear of failure. By the way, there's nothing wrong with any of these, depending on where you're at, nothing wrong with any of them. So that's the first of these. Let's go to the second of the three needs that we talked about. Some people have a high need for affiliation. A high need for affiliation. These are people who are concerned with relationships. They want to be a member. They want to be a part of something. They want to be loved. They want to be respected, etc. with regard to it. That's great. There can be some really good things there, the high loyalty of the membership and everything else like that. But just like we had something you want to be concerned about with the need to achieve people, here, one of the things you want to be careful about is oftentimes people with a real high need to achieve don't make very good leaders. And that's because they want to be loved so much, making hard decisions where people find that maybe aren't popular decisions. It's very difficult for them to do because they want people to love them. And if I have to make a decision that's not popular, it might be the right decision, but people might not love me. So it can be difficult for people with high needs for affiliation to be leaders. Now, once again, we have kind of a flip side, a shadow side to this. People who are similar to having a high need for affiliation are people who have a high fear of rejection. High fear of rejection. They don't really care if everybody loves them. They just don't want people to reject them. They want to be part of the group, not so much because everybody loves them, but because they don't want to be on the outside. They don't want people to reject them. So they have, just as we have fear of failure and need to achieve are very similar. Fear of rejection and need for affiliation are similar. There's some differences as well. So you might have a high need for affiliation, or you might have a high fear of failure with regard to it. Well, let's go to the last of these needs that is mentioned by McClellan. And the last of these needs is the need for power. The need for power. You've heard of people who are power hungry. The need for power. These are people who need to lead. They need to influence. They want to coach. They want to teach. They want to encourage others. They want to be in charge. This is what we're going to do, etc. Again, coaches and teachers oftentimes you see have a high need for power that we have. Related to this, you've got to be careful though, just like we had some careful things we want with regard to need to achieve an affiliation. People with high need for power, be careful. Some of them are really selfish. Some of them are selfish. So when they finally get that power, they use the power for themselves. Others who have a high need for power and strive for the power when they finally get it, they want to help others. Those certainly are the people I want to have a high need for power. They look at the common good as opposed to their good. They look at commonwealth as opposed to self-wealth with regard to it. The flip side, the related side, the shadow side of this is people have a fear of losing control. People who have a fear of losing control. They have to control everything, not so much because they want to control you, but they don't want others to control them. When others control us, as if I'm on that group, it's like, oh my gosh, they're always doing bad things, they're making bad decisions. So they don't want to lose control to that because they fear, oh my gosh, if I'm not in control, all bad things can happen to me. So they don't want to lose control. It's very similar to having a need for power, but it's a little bit different perspective, just like we had with regard to the others. Well, this finishes what I wanted to talk about with regard to motivation. And you can see we went over all sorts of different types of motivational tools and perspectives and whatever. Hopefully we've given you another tool or so for your toolkit to help you to be a better leader. Because think about it, if you want to be a good leader, if you want to be a successful leader, you really have to be motivational. You have to understand motivation. You have to be able to motivate those people who will become and will be your followers to do the things that you want them to do. So this concept of motivation, it's huge. And not only is it important, say, for this class, okay, I got to do it for quiz 1 or whatever it might be, and some of the other gradables that we have. Not only is it important for you as a leader in your work or whatever you're doing, the coach of a team or whatever it might be that you have, but I want you to think about how motivation can help you just from a personal level. When you go home tonight and you try to motivate somebody in your household, try to motivate your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your friends down the street, you try to go in for a job interview and you're trying to motivate these people to hire you. Motivation can be big, not just in the career level, but in the personal level as well. So hopefully you picked up something here. And now we'll move on to our next topic in leadership.